Hello and welcome to another episode of the AM Basketball Breakdown. I'm your host, Adam Miller. I hope that your week is going well and that you are looking forward to the weekend. For this episode, I wanted to try to do something a little bit different. It will still be basketball related, but we're not necessarily talking about a specific player, game, or just the NBA season in general. One of my favorite hobbies outside of watching basketball is actually watching movies. And when a notable basketball film comes to mind, part of this podcast, part of the reason for it is I want to be able to provide a space to talk about it with the hopes that more will end up wanting to watch this movie. But yeah, a little bit of background about the movie that I am going to talk about today with my friend Luke Secor. Back in 2020 during COVID, when everyone was shut up in their homes and there wasn't anything much to do, I watched a fair amount of movies. I became fairly acquainted with the Criterion Collection, which is a very niche movie distribution company that they mainly do foreign films and American contemporary or classic films and basically restore them if they don't have a proper high definition release. But within the Criterion Collection, there are very few either sports movies or sports documentaries. And during my time in COVID, I had become acquainted with a movie and watched a movie called Hoop Dreams. Hoop Dreams, it's a critically acclaimed documentary film directed by Steve James that was released in 1994. The film itself, it follows the journeys of two African American high school students, William Gates and Arthur Agee, as they pursue and work towards their dream of becoming professional basketball players. The movie starts with both of them as promising young athletes attending St. Joseph High School, a predominantly white institution in Westchester, Illinois. And both boys themselves, they come from very disadvantaged backgrounds. Gates, he faces pressure from his family for eventually giving financial support. And Agi, he deals with his father's absence and his family's own financial struggles. But yeah, I wanted to bring my friend Luke Secor on here because I trust Luke's opinions on movies, and I want to give Hoop Dreams the attention that I think it needs. I've appreciated getting to know Luke's honest opinions and thoughts on movies the last several years, and I'm really looking forward to this conversation with him. So let's go ahead and bring Luke on the AM basketball breakdown. Good morning. Welcome to the AM basketball breakdown. I'm Adam Miller, and for today's episode, I have my friend Luke Secor on to talk about the 1994 film Hoop Dreams. Luke, how are you doing?
I'm doing great, Adam. Thanks for having me on the show.
Yeah, this is definitely a basketball movie that I really enjoy, and I thought it would be best to kind of have one of my really good friends, film friends, to talk about it. I see you are sporting a Pacers shirt. That's
Yes.
right. Boom, baby. Yeah. You are ready. You're ready to go for the AM basketball breakdown.
Indeed. Let's get into it.
Yep, let's get into it. But yeah, I figured to start off with, I would kind of share a little bit of maybe my thoughts or like a little bit of my prior experience to Hoop Dreams. Really early on, I would say back in 2020, I had become aware of the film where everyone was kind of shut up in their homes for a number of months and had kind of gained a little bit of exposure to the Criterion Collection, which
Mhm.
they remaster, basically provide um, ways for physical media to be produced for movies that don't have like either a high definition release or any release in general. Mostly classic films, foreign films, or like American contemporary films. They have very few sports films, and Hoop Dreams is actually one of the very few sports movies or like sports documentaries in their catalog. I think they might have a Olympics one, and other than that, I can't think of anything else. But yeah, I'm a really big basketball fan, and this was something that I wanted to check out during that time. And it was something, honestly, as I've started this podcast, that I wanted to have a way to revisit because hopefully, after our conversation today, um, can hopefully maybe convince at least one other person to watch this because I think this is not only one of the best sports documentaries made, I think it's one of the best basketball documentaries ever made. But yeah, I'm wondering, Luke, from your perspective, like what was your prior knowledge about Hoop Dreams? And like as you were watching the film, what were some things that kind of surprised you about it?
Yeah, I didn't really have a whole lot of knowledge going into this. I had seen it on several documentary lists, saying like the 10 best documentaries, and this was consistently on those lists.
Hmm.
I knew that it was a Sundance film, and I knew that it got some awards there. Um, I watched the trailer and saw that it was about some kids trying to make it to the NBA. The runtime kind of it put me off a little bit, like 2 hours and 15 minutes. That seems like really
Yeah,
long.
basically 3 hours.
Yeah, basically. But when I'm watching it, I guess what surprised me was how much it keeps you engaged in the story.
Hmm.
And even if it's just like average, ordinary people going about their lives trying to achieve these dreams, it still draws you in. It doesn't need fancy explosions or anything. It just needs this human emotion, this human story. I think the fact that these aren't like these kids, William and Arthur, aren't household names,
Right.
and this was 30 years ago. So I don't know. Maybe they made the NBA, maybe they didn't, and so
They
it was that
didn't.
like not
Spoilers, they didn't.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but the fact that I didn't know, I purposely made sure that I didn't know going in because then that
Hmm.
kept me invested in the drama of, okay, here's a step forward, here's a step back. And each of those felt like, okay, are they going to achieve their dreams or not? And so that was like, we weren't guaranteed a Hollywood happy ending. And that was something that I think really drew me in as I was watching.
Yeah, definitely. There's like a really big element of like working hard towards something and kind of the struggle and like the hard work that comes with that. Um, but yeah, you're kind of at the start of the film, you're kind of given a more hopeful outlook.
Mhm.
The movie starts and they're both watching the 1988 NBA All-Star game, and this is right in the heyday when Michael Jordan has already been in the league for a few years. The All-Star game that year was actually in Chicago, but both of them are basically like, "Hey, I want to play in the NBA. I want to get to the NBA. I want to make sure my family's okay and like their financial situations are taken care of." Yeah, William Gates and Arthur Agee. Arthur's father, in particular, is very hopeful and says, like, "Yeah, I adamantly believe that he'll make it." And very early on, you have Earl Smith. He's a scout for a um, private school called St. Joe's, and he goes into a lot of the inner city playgrounds and basically scouts these kids very early on. And William and Arthur are the two people that we kind of get more, we get the most, well, all the exposure to throughout the movie. Their 4 year journey through high school, the struggles they face, the joys or accomplishments they get, just basically as they're trying to get a college scholarship and hopefully one day um, get to the NBA. But yeah, kind of a few things like going off of that. Like as you're looking at their struggles like very early on, are there a few things that kind of stick out to you that each of them kind of have to work through just as they're trying to like build up and trying to, I don't know, just improve themselves as athletes, but also like trying to gain exposure for the NBA?
Yeah, I think it was interesting that we did focus on two people. It wasn't just like one person,
Hmm.
because sometimes the film would be showing, oh, William is doing really well and Arthur is struggling, and then on other
Hmm.
times it would be Arthur's doing really well and William's struggling. And so in doing that, it was like not too much, oh, it's all hopeless or it's all wonderful.
Right.
It was this great balance of both, and I felt the themes of this film really gave it this staying power, because even though it looks very much like an 80s and 90s product,
Hmm.
it doesn't feel dated because the themes, I think, are really timeless. Being like, what is it that we put our worth in? And is it worth it to idolize our dreams? Or
Hmm.
is that ultimately harmful for us? Because at the beginning, it feels like, oh, it's this great thing to pursue their dreams. It is giving them hope, it is giving them a purpose. But then the more that life beats them down, the more that William is feeling this pressure, like, I've got to do this, I've got to be a winner. Um, I got to get past this injury. The more it becomes not a good thing, the more it becomes
Right.
something that is like destroying their hope when they can't reach these heights that they have set for themselves. And so that was something that I felt like, and we can talk more about like the different characters and how they impact this later, but that was something that I feel like really stuck with me when I was watching it, especially the beginning compared to the end.
Yeah, definitely. As you look at the beginning of the film and you contrast William and Arthur's journey, William is the more natural standout, where he's getting the attention very early on at St. Joe's. He starts right away on the varsity. He's the first person, I think, maybe other than Isaiah Thomas, or he might be the first person in general for St. Joe's that's starting as a freshman.
Mm-hmm.
So he clearly is already getting the attention from a lot of the college scouts. Letters are pouring in, and Arthur, in a lot of ways, kind of has to go through a lot of struggles during his time at St. Joe's, with having to commute like 3 hours round trip to school each day. Um, and yeah, he kind of starts off on a lower, just a lower field than William does at St. Joe's, and due to that, and just grades and his family not being able to pay for the tuition, eventually he ends up transferring and going to school closer to home. And that's an interesting part of this as you're going through this, as you contrast both of them. Like, both of them don't have their full tuitions covered. Um, and William's the one that, I guess, looking at like the different schools that they go through throughout high school, ultimately benefits because he's the one that shows the most promise for the future of making a great name at St. Joe's, while Arthur doesn't, and his full tuition costs aren't covered, and his family has to come to a basically a decision like, we can't afford for him to go here, like just in general, if we're having to cover everything. So he's going to have to look for different opportunities. But like the documentary doesn't like stop Arthur's story there.
Mm. Yeah.
It keeps going.
And that's something that when you're making a documentary, you don't know these things going in. You're like, oh, these
Mhm,
are two great basketball players that we want to follow. And when they do encounter these difficulties, like you said, they don't like just stop covering them. They
mhm.
continue and they continue to see, okay, where, well, what is the story here? If it isn't these two players making the NBA, then what story can we tell? Which I thought was a really, I mean, it's just the nature of documentary filmmaking.
Yeah, definitely. And originally, the filmmaker Steve James, he only intended this to be like a 30-minute, I think, public, like a 30-minute PBS special. Um, but I think when it had originally aired, or when they had originally had like the preview for it, he got a really rave review from Gene Siskel and Robert Ebert. Roger Ebert, not Robert Ebert. Roger Ebert, and ended up making it into a full length feature film that picked up a lot of steam around Sundance that year and released later in theaters. And this is a fun fact, it also is in the Library of Congress's National Film Registry alongside other films such as Citizen Kane and The Godfather.
Hmm.
So a lot of people recognize, not only critics, but like just the public in general recognize it as a very important piece of filmmaking. Yeah, just as you're like thinking and reflecting on having finished Hoop Dreams, finished the 3-hour runtime, like what are some like elements that like stick out to you that make it a timeless documentary? Even like as you said, this came out like in the early 90s. Like you can tell that it's dated, but like there are still a lot of really good things going on in this. But yeah, I'm just wondering like what sticks out to you in this to where like this really stands the test of time.
Yeah, I mentioned the theme. I think that that was something that, again, no matter who you are in life, we might have not have dreams about basketball, but we might have dreams about. For me, I know in high school I dreamed of being like the next Steven Spielberg, and
Mhm.
that obviously didn't happen. Um, and so I could see a bit of myself in some of these characters. In, I mean, I did well in school, and for me, I thought, oh, because I'm doing well in school, that means that I've got the rest of my future paved out for me.
Mhm.
But that wasn't the case, and I think that there's a lot of disillusionment that comes with pursuing a dream and having that, just not come to fruition. And so, again, I think that these are themes that aren't just stuck in the 90s. If anything, now, as we see so many other people like on social media and see them like, oh, they're getting to do what I thought I was going to be doing. And and having that reflected in our faces. So not having our dreams realized, I think, is a big part of it.
Mhm.
And there's a part where William asked, like, was this ever my dream, or was this like thrust upon me? And I don't know if he says that explicitly, but that's definitely the vibe I was getting from him.
Yeah, that's
Um,
hinted at kind of towards the end of the movie, yeah.
mhm. And so just the weight of expectations.
Mhm.
These are all things that are timeless and are not stuck in one decade or another.
Yeah, because a lot of their I find that a lot of their expectations or drive is not only making it to the NBA, but it's also being able to take care of their families financially enough to get them out of their current
Yeah, yeah,
situation, which I think is a really big part of the movie where you have scenes of like hope and you also have periods of sadness where you think, hey, is this going to work out or not? Um, but yeah, the documentary itself, it spans over their whole high school journey. I can think of this isn't necessarily a documentary, but I think there are a few other movies that kind of go with this approach. Well, this is a movie, not a documentary, but I can think of Boyhood that was
yeah,
filmed
yeah,
like over a period of 13 or 14 years with like the same actors the entire time. Granted, like it's not a like realistic piece, but it is interesting where you get to see the characters kind of age
yeah,
and basically like grow up during the movie. They're not obviously replacing them with anyone new, but like that's one part that I like really appreciated like about the movie. But how do you think the fact that it was filmed like over like 4 5 years, how do you think it helped with connecting with the characters themselves and their journeys throughout the film?
yeah. I think Boyhood was one of the movies that came to my mind too while I was watching
Mhm.
it. I think what's cool is that you're able to paint in these broad strokes, and a lot of movies that cover like a wide span of time, that's their goal, is to make the meaning not in like a specific situation that they zero in on. It's to um, show through this wide stretch of time and derive meaning from that.
Mhm.
And so I thought that that was cool. It's like, you know, when if you're reading the Bible and you can focus really specifically on one verse and gain meaning from that, or you can read like 5 chapters at a time, and the meaning that you get, well, hopefully coming from the same truth, is like it's different because you're seeing the broader picture. You're seeing these broad strokes,
Mhm.
and so I think also just the amount of time that we are able to spend with these kids, the way that we're able to see them change and develop, that's something that's really only possible. Like if they were to do it with one school year, I feel like that meaning would not have been as obvious. The growth would not have been as obvious as what they did with being able to show a full like 4+ years of life with these kids. And I think that that was really cool.
Yeah, definitely. Kinda to your point, you don't get, like, one snippet of their journey, you get the full picture, from start to end. Another, like, element of Hoop Dreams that stands out to me, you have, like, their school life, you see all of that, you see the recruitment process, you see the game footage,
Mhm.
but a decent amount of this is just their relationship with their families, with their parents. It's a very important part of the film. How how did you interpret or look at just the dynamics between the 2 different families and, like, the pressures that they faced? Did you find them similar at all, different at all?
Yeah, I mean, there were definitely some similarities, but then there are also some differences. In fact, this like the supporting characters of the movie, I think, really help make it the classic that it is. Like Arthur, you mentioned his dad, Bo, is walks out on the family, and he's kind of this example of, oh, I don't want to be like my dad.
Mhm,
And then his mom, Sheila, falls on welfare, and then she's constantly like beaten down, but eventually near the end she achieves her dream of becoming a nurse. And
mhm,
you see this like this decently sized room, but there's only like 7 people who have gathered to like celebrate this.
mhm.
And you compare that to like these big stadiums where all these basketball players are being cheered on by these crowds, and it's like, but what she did was equally as important to her in achieving her dream and being able to care for her family and being able to show, like, you know, even if you don't have this adoration from all these people, like what she's doing still matters. She's still
Mhm.
caring for her family.
Yeah, it matters to her.
Yeah. And then you see Arthur's friend Shannon, who they're like, you know, goofing off, having a great time throughout the show, and then he ultimately falls into drugs. And
Mhm,
so Arthur's like, well, I didn't do what he did. I didn't quite do what my dad did, but I didn't do what I wanted to do either. Like I didn't like achieve my dream. Like he goes to this really podunk, I don't know if that's the right word, but college where he's like one of only like 6 or 7 black students.
it's a
And
junior college, yeah.
yeah, and he just seeing these different views of what success is to
Mhm.
Arthur is really cool to be able to see those different perspectives. It's not just what Arthur views as success, it's what all these people view as success.
Right. Definitely, and I think there's, like, a pull of also, like, just influences from the different families
Mhm.
of also, like, hey, what are they viewing as success? I can think of, William's brother,
Yeah, Curtis.
uh, in the film that kind of had a similar story to William to where he was a, like, pretty prominent basketball player and basketball recruit, and it just didn't work out for him. So I
Mhm.
think in a lot of ways, he's trying to live through
Yeah.
his brother William's story and hoping that he succeeds and gets to accomplish the things that he at one time thought he would accomplish, but it just didn't. It just didn't work out.
Like,
Um,
I remember there's that one scene where, like, his mom is reading through all these different acceptance letters that William is getting, or
mhm.
these recruitment letters,
You have
and it
like
just keeps
Duke,
on
you have
cut.
IU, you have all the
Yeah,
important schools at the time.
and then it keeps cutting back to Curtis, and
Mhm.
Curtis is just like you're it puts you inside of his head. Like he's like, that could have been me, and it
Yeah.
wasn't. And I think that that's once again, it shows like this is a path that William might wind up going down
Mhm.
if he doesn't achieve his dreams. So it adds an extra layer of stakes to the story.
Yeah, definitely. That's, like, one, like, emotional or, like, takeaway scene that I can think of, and, like, this documentary itself, it's been praised for that emotional depth and authenticity. What other moments or scenes kind of stick out or stood out to you, like, the most in this movie that when you're thinking about it, you're like, "Oh, I remember this scene. This was a really good scene," or like, "Hey, this had a lot of really a lot of really good pull here, in the movie."
Yeah, I think the character of William's coach was a really interesting character.
Mhm.
If anyone's seen the movie Whiplash, it reminded me a bit about that, where he's not quite to the level of J.K. Simmons' character, but he is a bit emotionally abusive. And
Right.
he keeps on saying,
Yeah.
"I'm doing this for your benefit."
Mhm.
Like, "I'm gonna be riding you hard because I want you to be great, and right now, you're not rising to that level of greatness." And so it's asking these questions of, is it is what he was doing worth it? Like, if William had not felt that intense level of pressure, might he have been able to maintain that confidence? And so I think these different moments where like in these games where William has a chance to make a big impact, but his confidence just isn't there. And I'm on the edge of my seat, like, is he going to be able to do it? Is he going to be able to pull through? Because I was feeling the pressure from the coach as well.
Mhm.
And so that was something that, like, those games later in the movie where they're making these, like, they're having to make these clutch free throws, and sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. But I think it's because of all of this, like, these extra stakes that I cared so much about this movie. And um there's a quote near the end of the film where William basically says, like, people are always telling me, like, when you make it big, make sure to remember me. It's like,
Mhm.
well, if I don't make it big, will you remember me?
Hmm.
And I think that he was having to grapple with the fact that, are people only caring about me? Is my only worth because I have seen this little bit of success, or do these people care about me regardless? Like, because when he wins like MVP at the season-ending awards for his school, he doesn't feel satisfied. He feels like, I have all these thoughts going inside my head, but I can't talk to anyone about them, especially not coach, who will just tell me to suck it up and deal with it.
Right.
And so that was something that really, like, hit me. And then, like, when Bo, like, briefly re-enters Arthur's family, he's kind of like, is this gonna last? Is this gonna be something that, um is this genuine? And I'm sure that for anyone who has ever felt like that strain with a family member who, like, they start to make progress, they start to reconnect,
Right.
it's gonna last, or is he also just interested in me because of my potential for success? And one other thing that I noticed, that I think really hit hard for me was, like, Earl asking, "Did I do the right thing? Is it right to, like,
Yeah,
pull
later
these
on in the
kids,
film. Yeah.
yeah, out of their situation and put them in these high pressure situations?" I think he's like, "Oh, at a time, I really believed in what I was doing." And then I think later in the film, he starts to have these doubts about what he did.
Yeah, there are a few things that you kinda talked about there that also, like, resonated with me that I also wanna touch on. I think particularly, Arthur's relationship with his dad and William's relationship with his coach.
Mhm.
Starting with William's relationship with his coach, I can think, okay, William showed a lot of promise very early on. He was getting a lot of recruiting letters from some really notable schools and coaches at the time, and also dealt with like two pretty like serious like knee injuries throughout the film that he had to rehab from and could have ultimately like ended his career and any promise that he had. And there's a quote from his coach at the end of the film, and this maybe goes on kind of to your point with just, I don't know, like his outlook or his relationship with his players. This is him talking about William after basically he has his last coaching conversation with him before he goes off to college at Marquette.
Mhm.
This is about William. He didn't have, and then Williams already left the room, but camera's still rolling. He didn't have a great career. He had a good career.
Mhm.
And he
Yeah.
also touches on later, he's like, yeah, there are sometimes I didn't always feel like his heart or his head was always in it. And another player walks out, another player walks in. Just
Yeah.
like we're just gonna replace like one with another and just follow the same process again. And I don't know, that hit me a little bit um after that. But yeah, the other one, Arthur's relationship with his dad, where really early on in the film, his dad obviously sees promise in him having a successful basketball career. And he says, like, hey, I don't want to have him experience the same things that I experienced very, very early on in life. And Arthur leaves the family very early on in the movie, eventually comes back at the end and kind of help try to restore some of that relationship with his son. But there's a really important moment in the film very early on. I think not William, Arthur's already started at St. Joe's, and him and his dad are just shooting hoops on the playground. They're playing against each other for a little bit. Um, and there's a pause in action where Arthur's dad needs to leave, and camera's still rolling, but you can see Arthur in the background go and try to buy drugs from someone as the cameras
Arthur
still roll.
Senior, right?
Yeah, Arthur Senior.
Yeah.
You have Arthur Senior doing that as Arthur's still shooting, and yeah, there's like a lot of. It's interesting when you compare like Arthur's outlook very early on in the film, and then that happens later. But yeah, and then in the end, like he gets better. He ultimately tries to restore the relationship with his son. But yeah, that was another thing that kind of stood out to me. And then the other thing, the focus on Isaiah Thomas very early
Mhm.
on in the movie, particularly his career at St. Joe and pushing both, not him pushing, but having this idea pushed that like Arthur and William can kind of be that next great player. There's a scene really early on where Isaiah shows up at the school on Arthur's visit.
Mhm.
I think Arthur plays him one on one, which at the time, like Michael was the biggest player in the NBA, but it seems like this film was primarily focused on Isaiah Thomas,
Yeah,
ironically, and it's a movie about,
because he's a St. Joe grad.
yeah, he's a St. Joe grad, but it's a movie about basketball in the inner city of Chicago when Michael
Mhm.
Jordan's at his highest.
Yep.
So there's a little bit of like irony with that, but that's another thing where I think Arthur looked up to Isaiah a lot, and getting to play basketball with one of your idols was
Mhm.
just, I don't know, I thought that was a really cool um and powerful scene. But yeah, kind of just the final question to wrap things up. Basically, like in this conversation, what I want people to get out of, I want them to be persuaded or to have some interest after listening to or watching this to, hey, like I want to take some time and watch through Hoop Dreams. If you're a basketball fan and a movie fan, why should someone choose to watch this film? Why should someone choose to watch Hoop Dreams?
I mean, like I mentioned, the basketball games where, it's like back and forth, they are, fighting, these bigger schools, these rival schools, and it does give you a little bit of that thrill of an actual, like, game because you don't know what the outcome is. And I think that from a filmmaking perspective, what's interesting is that when you've got a narrative film, you write a story and then you go out and shoot it. Whereas with the documentary, you go out and shoot something and then you find your story, and you find that in the edit.
Yeah.
And so I can imagine like the probably years worth, months worth of footage that they have of like which they're going about editing, and then they're still trying to find that story. And so I think that being able to find and identify what your characters are, what they care about, what
Hmm.
they add to the theme and the subtext. This is all like very well handled. And some of the stuff is just like basic filmmaking techniques, like, they build up kind of this team called the Kings as this team that's kind of controversial for their recruiting practices.
Hmm.
And so just that little mention right there makes them kind of the antagonists of this scene, and you really want them to go down. And then other moments, other filmmaking techniques where just like they show this contrast between um, like this character in this situation, like they're on the basketball court, they're having fun, and then contrasting it with they're driving through the suburbs and all these homes that look nothing like the projects that they grew up in,
Hmm.
just to show how like out of water they are. Um, it also gets into these scenes as late as they can and gets out as early as they can, which is another great filmmaking technique. Um, Another thing I really liked was when it was cutting between like the coaches, Williams' knee, and kind of just showing. We all know what these coaches are thinking. Like, is this guy too big of a risk for me to take on?
Right.
And we know that what Williams feeling in that situation, like, oh no, I blew it. Everything is gone.
Hmm.
And just these like little moments of the way that they choose to edit the film creates meaning in and what the characters are saying without them ever having to speak. So if you're looking to like develop your skills as a filmmaker and wondering how to make people feel emotion, I think that this is a great film to be able to study.
Yeah, definitely. And to your point, like there are also, just from my perspective, there are a lot of like scenes that we had already mentioned that like I think about and I think through where I'm like, I kind of want to see that human struggle or like that hopefulness and working towards something to achieve again. But yeah, Hoop Dreams will definitely be something that I will pick up and watch again. For those that are interested, you can watch Hoop Dreams in a number of ways. If you have an HBO Max subscription, you can stream it on there. If you have a Paramount Plus subscription, you can stream it on there. And if you have a the Criterion Channel subscription, you can also stream it on there. I do know if you end up buying the Criterion Collection physical copy, there is also a 30-minute special feature in that where you get additional interviews from William and Arthur from 2015, just about their life after the movie,
Mm.
which I think I eventually choose to buy. I think that'd be something really interesting to watch. But Luke, I appreciate you jumping on the AM basketball breakdown this morning to talk about Hoop Dreams. I hope that at least a few people from listening to this will choose to watch this film. I really enjoyed watching it again and talking with you about it.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, Adam. It was great to watch the film for the first time and discuss it with you.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks again, Luke.
Yep, we'll see ya.